Let them talk if they want to.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRienzo. My guest, Paul Garrin. Joni Musi's not with us. She'll be back next week. And we say hi to her. She's visiting right now, and I hope she's watching on the internet. Hey, Joni, if you're there. And we're live, as usual, Let Them Talk. And as you can see, our number here, 212-757-1538, if you want to call and join the conversation. We're talking about Paul Garrin. Now, Paul's an expert on things like the internet, things like, it goes beyond that. Internet is such it's almost like a passé term right now. There's so much more going on in this digital world that we've been talking about the last couple of days, Paul, as you know. And, for example, is what we're doing right now, public access, cable TV. There's things like YouTube, which, of course, today came out that YouTube and Google are being sued. Google owns YouTube, are being sued for $1 billion by Viacom, a big cable producer. It produces content. We've been discussing this, including things like MTV and a number of other programs, well-known Comedy Central and others like that have huge followings. They're complaining that clips of their show their shows are winding up. As a matter of fact, they said 150,000 clips from their shows have been downloaded 1.5 billion times on YouTube. So they're saying they want now $1 billion payment because they're saying that their content is being used to draw viewers and therefore to create an audience for advertisers by the service YouTube, which is free to you and I and to anybody else to put up what you want. And we put up this show, for example, on YouTube every week, but it's obviously, as you can see, the material is our material. We created it. We're not taking it from any other site. But you know, obviously, we don't get 1.5 billion hits.
Well,
you know, although we do get a few thousand.
What I can say about that type
Paul
of thing.
Garrin, yeah.
Thank you for having me, Paul. By the way, one thing I can say about this lawsuit, as an example, is the old media is in crisis right now. We don't call this a media revolution for nothing. It's because the barrier to entry has become lowered to such a point where anybody can make television now. It's no longer the large corporations that necessarily control it. Although,
we're making television.
Although, let me qualify that, because actually they do own the infrastructure. And when I say that the large media is in crisis, it's because we've reached a point now called the convergence, the digital convergence.
Right.
And what that means is that all the different media that we're used to, the telephone, the television, and we've become used to internet and email and browsing the web, is all now coming down one line.
One line.
Over the broadband pipe, so to speak, okay, the network. And one of the biggest myths about so-called cyberspace is that it's virtual. And so, folks, there's no mystery why we have a guy with a tractor behind us.
Why is that? Why do we have a guy with a tractor behind us?
Scoot back a little bit more, Paul, so people can see the shot. Okay, well, a guy with a tractor behind us is because cyberspace is physical. It's not virtual. There are people have to go out with tractors and hard hats and dig trenches and lay lines. Okay, so who owns that is a big question, and what happens over that is a big question.
Sure.
So what we see is now with the digital convergence is
who does own it?
Whoever can afford to do that. And so in this case, right now, you know, we're familiar with all the large media corporations. You know, there's of course Time Warner and Verizon and WorldCom and all the scandals that go along with that.
Right. And Verizon? Did you mention Verizon?
Yes, but anyway, everybody knows that the phone company and the cable companies are now part of this crisis. You know, there are three aspects to this actually. We have content providers who makes the TV shows. This is the people who are now
like here, Let Them Talk.
Contesting.
And the other programmers here on Manhattan.
Whoever produces the show is the content providers, right? And then we have the infrastructure, the delivery medium, okay? And then that is right now a battle between the cable companies and the phone companies. Now what's happening is in this convergence is these technologies are coming together, but there are a variety of ways to patch your home into that broadband network.
I see.
Okay? And this now has also brought up...
What are these ways? There's cable, telephone, DSL line, there's satellite if you want to do it that way, there's wireless. And matter of fact, let's mention the fact, and I think we can, that you are the CEO of a company called Wi-Fi New York.
I'm the founder of Wi-Fi NY, WiFiNY.net. And
we won't go into the type of services you provide, except that it's what it says, Wi-Fi New York.
Well, Wi-Fi New York is basically a new model that we'll skip ahead a minute because we were talking about the way people get their broadband connection. It's assumed that there's a so-called duopoly, that the big companies own the means of delivery, either cable or DSL, generally speaking. There's actually a third way that can change the model also of ownership, which is an alternative way of delivering using wireless, using unlicensed spectrum. So generally,
unlicensed spectrum.
Unlicensed spectrum.
What's that?
What that means is normally.
Let's take it apart. What's spectrum?
Okay. Radio waves travel over the electromagnetic properties in the atmosphere. Okay, and the way we have been getting television and radio historically has been over the radio frequency spectrum. It's called. Propagates through the Earth's atmosphere and through space. In order to prevent interference, generally this spectrum has to be divided into slices. That's why they call it spectrum. They're bands, actually. Right? And each band has to be separate and distinct from the other so they don't cause interference. Okay, that's especially important in analog.
So a channel on TV, for example, corresponds to an actual frequency.
That's correct.
You call it channel 7, but it's really da-da-da-da-da.
It's a range of frequency from one point to another in the spectrum. And in order not to cause interference, this is delegated. And it's strictly regulated by the Federal Communications Commission.
You have to get a license.
Yes, and the way a license is granted these days is there are bids. This has been controversial, but basically large corporations can afford to buy a license to operate their service in a particular part of this radio frequency spectrum. All the different parts of the radio frequency spectrum are good for different applications. They're not all good for everything.
Some are cell phones, some are
well, it has to do with signal propagation properties, but it's too technical for the scope of this show. So suffice it to say that generally speaking, only large corporations with a lot of billions of dollars can afford to pay the government, the United States government, for the ability to operate within this spectrum exclusively. Okay? In 1996, the Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, and a lot of people reacted negatively to that because it changed the rules of ownership that set limits on, how much local media a particular corporation could own.
For example, our friends at Fox wanted to buy, they own the New York Post, they wanted to buy Channel 5. I think that was one of the.
There was a rule you couldn't own more than one TV or one newspaper in an area or something like that. And these rules have been changed, and there was a lot of uproar about the so-called consolidation of power in media. Okay.
Mr. Murdoch again.
Yeah, but on the other hand, those same rules, if you look at it from another point of view, enable entrepreneurialism. It actually allows startups to happen. That's one of the benefits that was generally overlooked in the Telecommunications Act that was very rarely used. And the other gift
in other words, let me just say, you could take an area of the law that hasn't been heavily rationalized or legalized, or a lot of laws haven't been written, and that allows an entrepreneur to come up with an idea.
Well, it's not even a matter of that. It's that the law says that there's no limit on how many local companies, media companies, one company can own, but it also allows new companies to start. Okay, it doesn't forbid them. It doesn't create a high barrier to entry. See, this is the question, and this is what fuels the media revolution. If we think back to the 80s, the advent of the home video camera, that lowered the level of the barrier of entry to production.
I see.
You understand?
Now a $500, $300 camera.
Now the barrier to entry to distribution is your broadband connection, whatever you pay. And so this is also the point of the controversy.
That's your cable bill or your DSL bill.
Yes. So anyway, so the two gifts that we got, in a way, if you interpret the Communications Act of '96 as an opportunity and not a threat, is first of all the ability to start up alternative ownership of local media. And then the barrier to entry came down as well, because the means of production, of distributing the network signals, for example, are cheaper. That's one aspect. And the other one is that goes with that is we got unlicensed radio spectrum. That means that the public, anybody without a spectrum license, if you stay within certain rules and guidelines not to deliberately cause interference, you can share the spectrum. And with digital technology, it's possible now more so than with analog, in fact, exclusively more so than with analog, to share the same frequency with different uses.
Now, let's explain analog.
So people know that, for example, as Wi-Fi.
This is analog, is what we're saying. Analog is this tape.
Yes.
Digital is your
what you
computer.
save on your computer.
Right.
Okay, and the way that the radio spectrum is used in the unlicensed bands is generally for digital use.
Right.
You know, Wi-Fi, for example, what they call wireless fidelity. Everybody's now looking for Wi-Fi on their laptops, and they're connecting wirelessly. Is now one method of unlicensed spectrum. This was one of the gifts that we got in the Telecommunications Act. And because of that, because of those two rules, the barrier to entry to new startups of local media and owning that,
yes,
and this is a very important point, who owns it, became possible. And you didn't have to be a multi-billion-dollar corporation to be able to lay fiber across the plains of America or whatever.
You could use it. You have a right to use that fiber for your own business.
We can use, and we don't have to buy the spectrum license because we're allowed to use it legally.
Now let's get into this net neutrality thing, because let me see if I understand this, and maybe everybody else knows it better than I do. But what you're saying is, what the companies are saying is that, hey, you're Google, especially the large boys, you know, Google, Yahoo, YouTube, all these people, you're like using our pipes to generate large audiences, and then you're selling advertising. You should pay more money to us. You should pay a piece of that to us for the right to use it. Now, other people are saying, for example, Move On and other organizations that have been pushing for net neutrality are saying that all data is the same, every packet, and we'll describe packets later. By the way, if you have a question, that's our number, is 212-757-1538. And let me get in here a little closer. I think I'm falling out of the screen. And folks should call, and we'll be willing to take your questions, and Paul can try and answer your questions. You have a call coming in. Want to try it?
Let me just address your question for a second. You said, what is net neutrality?
Yeah.
Okay, net neutrality is basically the debate that's come out of these issues that I just talked about. Is ownership, who owns what, and who has the right to send and deliver content over this medium. So the net neutrality is essentially a red herring. Okay, the net is not neutral. It never was, per se. But in order to understand this better, if you can give me about 2 minutes, I will give a brief history and explain what this all means and how it came about. Okay, the Internet was initially a government project. The DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, with the Defense Department, private corporations that basically in the telephone and computer industry, and universities. So government labs, universities, and these telcos basically collaborated in a public-private partnership. You know, the government funded some of it, and the corporations put some money into it as well, and we got the Internet out of that. The Internet protocol is the open source code that...
Open source means anybody, it doesn't
means
belong
that it's
to
not
anybody.
secret, it's published. And that since our tax money paid for the TCP/IP protocol, which is the basis of the Internet, how the data gets transmitted from one point to the other,
anybody can own it.
That's freely shared with everybody in the world, because we want the computer network to work. And the whole concept of the Internet is based on what's known as the end-to-end principle. What that means is that any data that originates at any node can reach any other node without obstruction. Okay. Now, in the beginning,
that was nuclear war.
That was
designed to go. If a city had been knocked out in a nuclear war, the packets, the signal could go around that.
There would be multiple paths, right? And the purpose of the Internet's conception was a decentralized command and control infrastructure that could survive. A nuclear strike. It's like, as you said. So if one node was knocked out, the rest of the Internet, which means an interconnection of networks, would continue to function.
Can I stop 1 second?
Yes.
Because it's just so fascinating, because I remember folks saying nuclear war isn't winnable. You know, we would never be the first to declare a nuclear war. Actually, the United States never did say that, did they? That unwinnable nuclear war will never be fought, that this is mutually assured destruction. But now we're saying that a whole infrastructure that we've taken to be part of our everyday lives, the Internet and everything that's grown out of it, was in fact designed specifically to survive and to continue communications within the United States in case of a nuclear war.
Well, that's right.
And a lot of effort and money went into it.
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, we got Teflon out of the space program and Velcro too. So
this is bigger than that, though.
Of course. No, of course. And so, at the time, anyway, up until 1995, the Internet was exclusively a government and university and corporate research medium. And in fact, there was something known as the Acceptable Use Policy, or AUP, which set the terms of use, what was acceptable to be done over this academic network. It was basically an academic and scientific network.
Non-commercial.
And up until 1995, no, there was no commerce. In fact, commerce was forbidden. And along came a group, John Perry Barlow and Mitch Kapor, came together and founded something called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. Now, most people associate EFF with, basically social justice issues and freedom issues on the internet. But in fact, the Electronic Frontiers Foundation's primary mission, their foundation mission, was to lobby to change the acceptable use policy of the internet to allow commerce. So before the 1995, before the EFF's campaign was successful, there was no such thing as e-commerce. Once the acceptable use policy of the internet was changed and the growth of home connections started to explode, it became possible or acceptable to do, because it was never illegal. You would just be flamed, as they said. You would get nasty emails and people would attack you and say nasty things if you tried to sell something. So the internet was based on this free exchange of information, non-commercial thing, because it was funded, it was subsidized. Once the demand came to grow, the old media companies still didn't understand the potential of it, but it became a phenomenon. Everybody at home realized, oh, I can put up a web page. That was the first way. So already publishing model began to shift. It began to decentralize and go out to the edges.
Well, people discovered that it's sure a heck lot cheaper to publish a magazine in pixels on a computer screen than to print 40, 50, 100,000 copies of a magazine.
Well, this is what I'm talking about, lowering barrier to entry. So it became affordable. Suddenly, it wasn't inconceivable that someone could start up their own newspaper or magazine and put it online. That's when it started, before broadband. Okay, what happened then is we had different speeds we could connect to. Right? The thing that caused the internet to explode was the point-to-point protocol that allowed download to come directly to your computer at home. Once those dial-up over the phone line connections became ubiquitous, then the demand for greater speed and faster downloads. Yes, the more bells and whistles, they say, the faster the download needed to be. So they then started to tax the existing technology for how we were connecting to the internet. And they had situations in certain areas where there weren't enough dial-up lines for everybody to stay on all the time, because when the phone system was built, they put enough copper lines out there to string each home that would only allow a certain number of calls simultaneously. They didn't expect people to be on more than a few minutes, not for days and days at a time.
With so the computer hooked up for like hours.
So this then forced the industry to invest and discover other means of delivering service, faster service, and also over which medium they could deliver the service. Because again, and it started with faster modems. You know, you start out with a 14.4, or even somebody started with a 1200 baud for
9600.
9600. So they were faster and faster modem speeds until it got to the limit what they could do over the phone line, which was 56K. You know, you could maybe 128 if you had ISDN or something, but basically there was a limit. It was not what they consider today broadband. Then what started to happen, all these shifts in policy and rules started to change, as well with the mushrooming of commerce on the web. You know, all the dot-bomb phenomenon in the late 90s, when all the companies came and went and there was a fever of capital.
I worked in that.
But this exponential growth also put demand on the network, and the companies saw that they needed to invest more to expand their capacity. All the while, the manufacturers of hardware and all this were all working toward where we are today, which is the convergence. And what happened is this convergence...
The unified theory.
That all the different media come over IP networks using a fast connection. Now the question is, it's very expensive to build that out and get it out to people, okay? And this is where we come down to now. There's a fight over bandwidth, because now the ability to make television at home,
the size of the pipe, the information,
or the speed of your download for the home users who that's a more humane way of explaining it. So the speed of the download becomes crucial. And what happens now is
we got a call coming in. We got to give the guy a chance. It might be a crank, but let's give it a shot.
Okay.
This is great, but we got to let the people in. And hi, you're on Let Them Talk. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good. Got a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering about what this guy thinks about some of these current things that are happening. Like last week, there was a copyright royalty board or something like that declared these new taxes for internet radio, and you got Viacom's suing Google now. That was announced today, and it seems like these big corporations are starting to make a push to have more control, and there's this net neutrality, everything else. Seems like the government's going to have a tough time keeping up with this in terms of the time they take to create policy and so forth. And I feel like, things are really fragmented in terms of online communities and organizing people to respond to this. I'm just wondering what you think we could do to maintain, the access, the equitable access to online and broadband resources in the future.
I think that's a great question, and what I'm hoping to get to the point on that now, and you help spur it along, it comes down to that. It comes down to the ownership. And who owns the medium? Okay, thanks for calling. Whoever owns the medium sets the rules. And as I was saying, with the unlicensed spectrum, and there are many different bands other than the Wi-Fi. There's higher speeds that we can do, gigabit per second over the air using unlicensed spectrum. It's possible to purchase bandwidth wholesale and redistribute it locally retail. And the barrier to entry to doing that has been lowered by, first of all, unlicensed spectrum, and then the availability of professional-grade equipment that can replicate fiber using unregulated technologies. That's one way. And the other thing is that who owns the medium sets the rules. So the policy that the large companies are using basically in this battle over ownership of delivery and content rights and all this type of thing, how to get it to the end user, lies in what we call the last mile. And net neutrality really comes down to who controls the path between the ISP, the internet service provider, or the data broadband provider, and the subscriber, the user, the person at home or in their office.
That's a phone line that's between a node where these large...
Whatever the broadband connection may be, whether you're getting it over a cable, whether you're getting it over a DSL, or as in Wi-Fi NY's model, if you're getting it over the air using unlicensed spectrum.
That's the last mile.
Getting the connection from the access to the internet to the subscriber, to the end user. And so who controls the last mile sets the policy over the last mile. So yes, viewer, your question was, how can we change that? Is by starting up local organizations who know how to buy bandwidth wholesale, high speed, and redistribute it to their members, their cooperative structure, however it is. In our case, Wi-Fi NY is what we call a citizen stakeholder model, where all the people who use the network are members of the organization who owns the network.
What about legislation? Because we have right now, for example, here, we're talking about saving public access, that the cable company, the last mile provider...
Okay, stop this right now. Sure. Go back to that one graphic.
All right.
And this shows it. Okay.
Right.
Let's go back. There we go. Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Here we have the...
Let's give them some...
Here we go. Here's the central office. This is the data center where the internet connection comes up. And then this is the local carrier who distributes it locally. And then this goes down to the customer's home, to the subscriber's home. And this is obviously in the suburbs.
What's the last mile
This is the last mile right here. This is called the first mile. So, for example, the interstate fiber or whatever the connections, they end up somewhere in a physical building where there are racks of computers and connections that plug into each other. This is the physicality of the so-called cyberspace. Then that connection, and this may be just a logical diagram, is aggregated. So if all the different carriers come up, let me move that chair, into the building, like this is, for example, what we call a carrier neutral center. That means Verizon, MCI, XO, WorldCom, everybody comes into the same building and they plug into each other. This is how one traffic from one network passes to another. That's then fed all together to another point. Say this is the wholesale purchase, right, where that aggregation of all that traffic is done. And then this point is where it can be bought wholesale And this is already neutral because that wholesale is I'm going to pay you for so much bandwidth. So this could be, for example, Google, or this could be a local community access organization, or whomever. And however much bandwidth you pay to plug in, to feed into all these other networks is neutral because you're buying it in bulk. That's wholesale. Then how you connect it, how you get this down to your members, your subscribers, or whomever. This could be a cable connection, this could be a DSL connection, or this could be over the air using unlicensed spectrum like wireless, for example. This is the last mile, and this is the part where the neutrality breaks down, because this congestion, there's so much demand for bandwidth that if everybody's sharing files and everybody's uploading their own TV shows and things like that, to this point up, it's going to fill this up and there's not going to be enough capacity. So in order to control that, what the big companies are doing is they're vertically integrating. They are want to sell you the content that they have deals with and exclude everything else. So that means you can't feed in, and what comes down to you is limited by what these guys want to send you.
So it's so weird. So the democratic nature of the internet is really sort of attracting some powerful enemies, is what you're saying.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that the democratic nature of the internet is more in spirit than in actual practice. And although, because people have a misconception that the internet is public. Right. What's public is the protocol, not the infrastructure. The infrastructure,
not the wires and cables.
Who owns it, right, and who has the means to build it.
Now, how do we sum this up?
Well, how we sum this up is basically, to answer the viewer's question, is that we can create ownership of this part, the wholesale purchase and the retail distribution to the end users, so the last mile policy can be set to be neutral. And then it's just a matter of the strength of this organization, how much bandwidth they can buy.
So you're saying communities that are organized together for the purpose, almost cooperatively, like the old farm co-ops.
Yeah, or power plant co-ops.
Right, to buy large blocks of internet time, distributed among their members.
That's right.
And go by their own rules.
Right, because they own it collectively and they can write the rules. This is what I call the citizen stakeholder model.
That way they would not necessarily worry about what the policies of the last mile providers.
Well, they are the last mile providers.
They become
the last mile providers, and therefore this is in a way this is actually a solution to the net neutrality issue that does not require legislation, and it works with existing laws using unlicensed technology with a lower barrier to entry. So if we take these gifts that we were given, the unseen gifts from the communication. So the media revolution is here. We can take it into our own hands using the unlicensed spectrum and learning how to organize local ownership of the last mile.